The fist came fast. Tyrell's arms swung wide, knuckles aimed at the homeless man's jaw. But before the blow could land, a 72-year-old woman threw herself between them. "Don't you dare!" Hattie shouted, her voice cracked like a whip. Tyrell froze mid-swing, his face twisted with rage. The homeless man, beard matted, clothes hanging off his frame like rags on a scarecrow, didn't flinch. He just stood there, hands loose at his sides, eyes cold and steady. Then the sirens came. 3 squad cars screamed around the corner, tires shrieking against asphalt. Doors flew open. Officers poured out, boots hitting pavement in synchronized thuds. Tyrell's sneer returned. "Finally," he said, jabbing a finger at the homeless man. "Y'all here to take out the trash? This bum's been trespassing on my property for 3 days." The police chief, a broad-shouldered man with salt and pepper hair, walked past Tyrell like he was invisible. He stopped 2 feet from the homeless man and snapped to attention. His right hand shot up in a crisp salute. The chief said, voice tight with respect, "General Sterling, perimeter secure, sir." Tyrell's mouth fell open. Hattie, still braced for a punch that never came, slowly lowered her arms. Her eyes darted between the chief, the homeless man, and Tyrell's fish-gaping face. "Wait," she whispered. "What?" The homeless man, General Sterling, didn't smile. He just gave a single nod. "Do you believe in karma? Stay until the end to see how this cruel landlord pays the price when he discovers who this homeless man really is. But to understand how a homeless man became a general, we need to go back to 3 days earlier. Back to a cold apartment in Detroit, where Hattie Williams was counting her last dollar. The freight train rattled past, shaking the walls of the 4th-floor walk-up. A red eviction notice clung to the refrigerator, trembling with each passing train like it was counting down her final days. Hattie stood in her kitchen, the kind of cold that comes from a furnace that's been off for 2 weeks, seeping through her sweater. She held a single-dollar bill between her fingers, smoothing out the creases like it was something precious. The glass jar on the counter had a handwritten label, rent. She dropped the bill inside. It landed alone at the bottom, not even close to the $850 she owed. Her stomach growled a hollow, angry sound. She ignored it. She'd gotten good at that. Instead, she walked to the bathroom mirror. The woman staring back had deep lines around her eyes and silver hair pulled into a tight bun. But her collar was straight. Her blouse, faded but clean, was buttoned all the way up. "You can be broke, Hattie," she whispered to her reflection, adjusting the collar one more time. "But don't you dare let them see you broken." Another train screamed past. The eviction notice trembled. She turned away and reached for her coat, a wool thing that had seen better decades. Her hands found the pockets, empty, except for a crumpled tissue and the wrapped half of a sandwich she'd been rationing since yesterday. The apartment pressed in on her. The cold, the silence. The weight of 62 years in this neighborhood, and now 3 days until she'd be on the street. She grabbed her keys and headed for the door. Not because she had anywhere to go, not because the sandwich would last longer outside, but because the 4 walls felt too much like a coffin. The stairwell smelled like mildew and somebody's burnt dinner. She took the steps slow, one hand on the railing, the other clutching the sandwich in her pocket like a lifeline. Outside, the Detroit winter hit her in the face. Gray sky, gray streets. The kind of cold that doesn't just chill your skin, it settles in your bones and makes a home there. Hattie pulled her coat tighter and started walking toward the park. She thought she was just looking for a place to escape the cold, but she didn't know that someone was waiting for her there. Someone who was testing whether she was worthy. And the first move was about to begin. The park bench had seen better years. Hattie found her usual spot beneath the bare oak tree, the wood cold even through her coat. She unwrapped the sandwich from her pocket, half a piece of white bread with a thin smear of peanut butter. Yesterday's breakfast. Today's lunch. Maybe tomorrow's too, if she was careful. She was about to take a bite when she noticed him. A man sat 3 benches down, maybe 50 years old, with a beard that hadn't seen a razor in weeks. He wore an old army jacket, olive drab, the the kind issued decades ago, torn at the shoulder seam. His boots were military surplus too, scuffed and splitting at the soles. But it was his posture that caught her attention. Straight back, shoulders square. Even sitting on a park bench in torn clothes, he held himself like he was waiting for inspection. Hattie looked away. She'd learned not to stare at people's suffering. It was rude, and in Detroit, suffering was everywhere. She raised the sandwich to her mouth. Then she smelled it, the faint, clean scent of soap, not the flowery kind from a store. Military soap, the kind her husband used to keep in his duffel bag, even years after he'd come home. Her hand froze halfway to her lips. From somewhere across the park, a car radio drifted through the cold air. Tinny and distant, but unmistakable. The national anthem. The man in the army jacket stood up, not slowly, not casually. He stood like someone had yanked a cord in his spine, bolt upright, heels together, right hand snapping to his brow in a perfect salute. He stood there, motionless, while the anthem played. 30 seconds, 45, a full minute. His hand didn't waver, his eyes locked on some invisible flag in the middle distance. When the music stopped, he lowered his hand and sat back down. Hattie watched him the whole time. He never looked her direction, never acknowledged that anyone might be watching. He just did it, because that's what you did. Her throat tightened. She looked down at the sandwich in her hand, then back at the man. His jaw worked like he was chewing on air. His throat moved in a hard swallow. His hands gripped his knees, knuckles pale. Hungry. The way she was hungry. The way that gnaws at your stomach until it's all you can think about. Hattie stood up. Her knees protested, but she ignored them. She walked over to his bench, each step deliberate, and sat down beside him without asking. The man glanced at her sharp, quick, the way a cornered animal checks for threats. Then his eyes softened, just a fraction. "Morning," he said. His voice was rough, like he hadn't used it in days. "Morning," Hattie replied. She looked down at her sandwich. Half a piece of bread, not much, but it was something. She tore it in two. The man's eyes tracked the movement. His throat worked again, but he didn't reach for it, didn't say a word. Hattie held out the larger piece. "Food tastes better when you have company, Mr. Stevens." He blinked. "Stevens? That's what you look like," she said, offering a small smile. "A Mr. Stevens." For a long moment, he just stared at the bread in her wrinkled hand. Then, slowly, his rough, calloused fingers closed around it. "Eli," he said quietly. "You can call me Eli." "Hattie," she replied, "and you're welcome." They sat in silence, chewing slowly, making the bread last. The cold bit at their faces, but neither one moved. Around them, Detroit kept going, cars honking, people shouting, the distant clang of a freight yard. When they finished, Eli reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out something small, a coin, worn smooth at the edges. He turned it over in his fingers, then looked at Hattie. "My son used to say something," he said quietly. "He said you can tell who someone really is by what they do when no one's watching." Hattie frowned. "But I'm right here." "Exactly," Eli said. He pocketed the coin and stood up. "Thank you, Hattie. I won't forget this." Then he walked away, leaving her on the bench, wondering what he meant. Hattie was still sitting on the bench, trying to make sense of Eli's words, when she heard the footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, the kind that announced themselves on purpose. She looked up and felt her stomach drop. Tyrell. He came walking across the park with the easy confidence of someone who'd bought his way into the neighborhood. 40 years old, dressed in the uniform of the new Detroit charcoal wool coat, tailored vest, leather gloves, shoes polished to a mirror shine. He'd shown up 2 years ago with a stack of LLC paperwork and plans to revitalize the block, which meant raising rents until people like Hattie couldn't afford to stay. He spotted her and smiled. Not the friendly kind. "Well, well," Tyrell said, stopping in front of her bench. "Mrs. Williams, out here enjoying the amenities?" His eyes slid past her to where Eli had been standing moments before. "And you've made a friend?" Hattie glanced over her shoulder. Eli was still there, 20 feet away, standing near the trash can with an empty water bottle in his hand. "Leave him alone, Tyrell," Hattie said. Tyrell laughed. "I'm not even talking to him. Yet." He raised his voice, projecting across the park. "Yet. It's summer." Eli didn't move, didn't look up, just stood there, still as stone. Tyrell took a step closer to Hattie, lowering his voice to something almost conversational. "Do you have my money yet, Mrs. Williams? Or are we still pretending you'll magically produce $850 by tomorrow?" "It's not your building," Hattie said quietly. "You just manage it." "Same difference." Tyrell shrugged. "And tomorrow morning? I'm changing the locks. So unless you've got $850 in that little purse of yours, I'll have it," Hattie lied. Tyrell's smile widened. "No, you won't." He turned away from her, his attention shifting to Eli. He walked over, each step loud and deliberate, until he was standing right in front of the older man. "Hey," Tyrell said. "You deaf or something?" Eli finally looked up. His face was blank, empty, but his eyes, Hattie saw something flicker there, something cold and calculating. "I hear you fine," Eli said quietly. "Good." Tyrell reached out and flicked the water bottle out of Eli's hand. "Then you heard me say this is my neighborhood, and I don't like bums making it look trashy." The bottle tumbled through the air, and Eli's hand shot out, fast, impossibly fast. He caught the bottle mid-flight, fingers closing around it like a trap snapping shut. The movement was so smooth, so precise, it looked rehearsed. Tyrell blinked, momentarily thrown. But he recovered quick. "Oh, you got reflexes?" He laughed, stepping closer. "That's supposed to scare me?" Eli didn't answer. He just set the bottle down on the ground carefully, his movements controlled, slow. But Hattie saw the way his fist clenched at his side just for a second before he forced it open. She'd seen that look before, on her husband. That look that said, "I could end this, but I won't." Self-control. Hard-earned and harder kept. Tyrell didn't see it. He was too busy puffing himself up, stepping even closer, invading Eli's space. "What, you gonna hit me?" Tyrell taunted. "Go ahead. Give me a reason to call the cops on your homeless." "That's enough." Hattie was on her feet before she knew she was moving. She stepped between them, one hand raised like a shield. "He didn't do anything to you, Tyrell," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "He's just sitting here, minding his business." Tyrell looked down at her, amused. "You defending him now? This bum?" "He serves God by enduring you, Tyrell," Hattie said, her voice rising. "Don't push him." Tyrell stared at her. Then he threw his head back and laughed. "Oh, Mrs. Williams," he said, shaking his head. "You really don't know when to quit, do you?" He pulled on his leather gloves slowly, one finger at a time. "Tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. I'm changing those locks. And if you or your friend here are still on my property when I arrive," he smiled, adjusting his coat collar. "Well, I have lawyers for that, very expensive ones. They're quite good at handling trespassers." His smile widened. "They eat people like you for breakfast, and bill me for the pleasure." Then he turned and walked away, wool coat swaying, shoes clicking on the pavement like a countdown. Hattie stood there, fists clenched, heart pounding. Behind her, Eli was silent. When she finally turned around, he was watching her. Not with gratitude, not with pity, with something else. Respect. And, maybe, approval. "You didn't have to do that," he said quietly. "Yes," Hattie replied, her voice still trembling. "I did." Eli nodded once. Then he picked up his water bottle and walked away without another word. Hattie sank back onto the bench, her legs suddenly weak. Tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. She had less than 24 hours. Hattie didn't expect to see him again. After the confrontation in the park, after Tyrell's threats, she'd assumed Eli would disappear. People like him usually did kept moving, stayed invisible, avoided trouble. But when she climbed the stairs to her fourth-floor apartment that evening, breath short and knees aching, she found him sitting on the landing outside her door, waiting. "Mr. Eli," she said, one hand on the railing to steady herself. "What are you doing here?" He stood up slowly, like his own body hurt. "Wanted to make sure you got home safe," he said. "After what happened?" Hattie's chest tightened. When was the last time anyone had worried about her safety? "That's kind of you," she said quietly. "But I've been getting home safe for 72 years. I think I can manage." Eli nodded, but he didn't move. Just stood there in the dim hallway light, his torn army jacket hanging off his shoulders, hands shoved deep in his pockets. "You got a minute?" he asked. "There's something I'd like to show you." Hattie hesitated, then unlocked her door. "You want some tea? It's all I've got. But it's hot." "Tea's fine." They sat on the small porch outside her apartment, barely big enough for 2 folding chairs and a plastic crate Hattie used as a table. The night was cold, but the wind had died down. Across the street, the freight yard hummed with distant machinery. Hattie handed Eli a chipped mug. He wrapped both hands around it, grateful for the warmth. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then Eli reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a coin. It caught the streetlight dull gold, worn smooth at the edges. He turned it over in his fingers, almost reluctant to let it go. Hattie leaned closer. "What's that?" "Challenge coin," Eli said quietly. "They give them out in the military. Symbols of brotherhood, achievement." He paused. "This one belonged to my son." Hattie's breath caught. She hadn't known he had a son. The coin had an emblem on one side, an eagle, wings spread. On the other, words she couldn't quite make out in the dim light. "What does it say?" she asked softly. Eli's jaw tightened. "De oppresso liber," Latin, means to free the oppressed. Special Forces motto. He stared at the coin. Marcus carried this. Army engineer, 22 years old. Carried. Past tense. Hattie felt the weight of that word settle between them. "What happened to him?" she whispered. Eli was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was flat, controlled. The way people talk when they've told the story too many times, and emotion would break them. IED, Kandahar. He was clearing a road so civilians could get supplies into a village. Saw the wire, yelled for everyone to get back. Eli's hand closed around the coin, but he was too close. Hattie's hand went to her mouth. Eli stared out at the dark street. "I worked my whole life, built everything I could, tried to give him a future." His voice cracked, just barely, but I couldn't protect him when it mattered. Hattie heard something in those words that didn't quite fit. A homeless man talking about building a future? About trying to give his son everything? She looked at his face, the deep lines, the exhaustion, the way his eyes had gone somewhere far away. Poor man, she thought. Grief had broken him, made him confused, made him think he'd been someone he wasn't. She didn't correct him, didn't question him. She just reached over and touched his arm. Eli looked down at her hand, wrinkled, spotted with age, resting on his torn sleeve. Something in his face shifted, softened. "He believed people were worth saving," Eli said quietly. "Died, proving it." He looked up at her. "I've been trying to figure out if he was right." "And?" Hattie asked. Eli smiled faintly. "Today, in the park, you stepped between me and that man. You didn't know me. You had nothing to gain." He paused. "You just did what was right." He pocketed the coin and stood up, reaching for his jacket. He folded it carefully, not the way someone rolls up a coat to shove in a bag, but the way soldiers fold a flag. Crisp edges, sharp corners, hospital corners. Hattie watched him work, something tugging at her memory. Her husband used to fold things the same way. "You remind me of him," Eli said, finishing the fold. "My son, the way he saw people." Hattie's eyes stung. "I'm sorry you lost him." "Me too." Eli pulled out a phone, not a smartphone, something older, bulkier. A satellite phone, maybe. "I should let you rest," he said. "Big day tomorrow." Hattie's stomach dropped. "Tomorrow, 8 a.m. The locks." "Yeah," she said quietly. Eli stepped to the edge of the porch, then paused. He looked back at her one more time, something unreadable in his eyes. "Thank you, Hattie," he said. for the bread, for standing up, for reminding me why it matters. Then he turned and walked down the stairs, phone pressed to his ear. Hattie heard his voice drift up, low and deliberate. Yeah, it's me. She's the one. She has Marcus's heart. A pause. Proceed with the acquisition. I want it done by morning. His footsteps faded into the night. Hattie sat there in the cold, staring at the empty doorway, her tea going cold in her hands. She didn't understand what he meant, but something had just changed, and she couldn't shake the feeling that tomorrow wasn't going to go the way Tyrell thought it would. Morning came too soon. Hattie woke to heavy boots on the stairs. She threw on her robe, fumbling with the chain lock, but before she could undo it, Tyrell was already pushing the door open. "Mrs. Williams," he said, stepping in with his crew. "Right on time." Tyrell gestured to the men behind him. "Gentlemen, wait here. Mrs. Williams and I need to have a conversation first." He stepped past her into the apartment without asking permission. Hattie's hands shook as she followed him inside. "You can't just—" "I can," Tyrell said, setting his briefcase on her kitchen counter. He clicked it open and pulled out a sheet of paper, official-looking, typed. "And I am." He held it out to her. Hattie took it with trembling fingers, eyes scanning the words. It was dense, legal language, but one line jumped out at her in bold. Acknowledgement of property damage. $5,000. "What is this?" she whispered. "Your choice," Tyrell said, crossing his arms. "Sign that paper admitting you damaged the unit and agree to pay restitution. Or I call the police right now." He leaned in close. "Vandalism, destruction of property. At your age, a criminal record means jail time. I didn't damage anything." "It doesn't matter what you did," Tyrell said calmly. "It matters what I say you did. My legal team against your word. Who do you think they'll believe?" The paper trembled in her hands. "You have 30 seconds, Tyrell said, checking his watch. "Sign, or I make the call." Hattie's eyes burned. She looked around her apartment, the walls where her wedding photo used to hang, the corner where her husband's reading chair had been before she sold it last winter, and on the shelf by the door, the wooden case. Triangular. Glass front. Inside, folded with perfect precision, the American flag they'd given her at his funeral. Tyrell followed her gaze and frowned. "Tick-tock, Mrs. Williams?" She looked back at the paper. At the lie she was being forced to sign. Her hand wouldn't move. "Fine," Tyrell said, pulling out his phone. "Have it your way." "Wait," Hattie's voice cracked. Tyrell paused, finger hovering over the screen. Waiting. Hattie's chest felt like it was caving in. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. I need a pen," she whispered. Tyrell's smile widened. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a silver pen. Expensive, engraved. He held it out like a weapon. Hattie took it. Her hand hovered over the signature line. Tyrell glanced at his watch, then at the doorway. The eviction crew was still waiting outside, blocking the hall. "Actually," he said, walking over. "Let me prop this open. Easier for the boys to move your things out." He looked for a wedge. His eyes landed on the shelf. "On the flag case. This'll work," he said, reaching for it. "No," Hattie gasped. But Tyrell had already grabbed it. He crouched down and jammed the corner of the wooden case under the door. The case tilted. The glass front pressed against the door frame, and the folded flag inside, the one they'd draped over her husband's casket, the one the honor guard had presented to her with white gloves and a salute shifted. One corner of the red and white stripes peeked out from beneath Tyrell's polished shoe as he adjusted the angle, pressed into the dirty hallway floor. "There we go," Tyrell said, standing up and brushing off his hands. "Much better." Something inside Hattie shattered. "That's my husband's flag," she whispered. Tyrell glanced down at the case, then back at her. "So? He served," Hattie said, her voice breaking. "He fought for this country. That flag, that's his honor. It's holding a door open," Tyrell said flatly. He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and wiped his hands. "Now sign the paper, Mrs. Williams, and I'll move it. Simple as that." Hattie's knees buckled. She grabbed the counter to keep from falling, staring at the corner of the flag crushed beneath the doorstop. The pen slipped from her fingers and clattered to the floor. "Please," she whispered. "Please don't." Tyrell picked up the pen and pressed it back into her hand. "Sign," he said slowly. "And I'll pick it up. Your choice." Hattie looked at him. At the flag. At the paper. This wasn't about money. It wasn't even about the apartment. This was cruelty. He was forcing her to choose between her husband's memory and her freedom. Her hand trembled so hard, she could barely hold the pen. Down the hallway, a figure stood in the shadows. Eli. He had come back to check on her, but seeing the flag crushed on the floor and Hattie's tears, his face went cold. His jaw locked. He pulled the satellite phone from his pocket and pressed a single button. "Standing by, sir," a voice answered instantly. Eli's voice was calm, the voice of a commander. "Code red," he said. "Execute now." He ended the call. Tyrell had no idea what was coming. He just used a veteran's memorial flag as a doorstop. If your blood is boiling like mine, comment justice right now. This man is about to learn a lesson he'll never forget. The sirens came 30 seconds later. Hattie heard them first distant, then closer, then right outside the building. Multiple cars, screeching tires, doors slamming. Tyrell heard them too. He straightened up, frowning, and walked to the window. "What the hell?" he muttered. Hattie stayed frozen at the counter, pen still trembling in her hand, eyes locked on the flag case wedged under the door. Heavy boots pounded up the stairwell. Fast, purposeful. Tyrell turned from the window, confusion flickering across his face. "Mrs. Williams, did you call someone?" Hattie shook her head mutely. She hadn't called anyone. She didn't have anyone to call. The boots hit the 4th floor landing. And then they appeared. 4 police officers, full uniforms, hands resting on their belts. Behind them, more footsteps, men, in dark suits, earpieces, moving with military precision. The lead officer, a broad-shouldered man with silver hair and gold stars on his collar, stopped in the doorway. His eyes swept the apartment, taking in Tyrell, Hattie, the eviction crew backed up against the hallway wall, and Eli, standing quietly in the shadows near the stairwell. "What's going on here?" Tyrell demanded, stepping forward with that same confident smile. "Officers, thank God you're here. This woman is—" The police chief walked past him, didn't even look at him, just walked straight past, like Tyrell was invisible, and stopped in front of Eli. Hattie watched, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. The chief of police, stood there for a long moment, looking at Eli. The homeless man in the torn army jacket, the man with the matted beard and the worn boots. Then the chief's right hand came up. Sharp, crisp, perfect, a salute. "General Sterling," the chief said, his voice tight with respect. "Perimeter secure, sir." The hallway went dead, silent. Hattie's pen clattered to the floor. Tyrell's mouth fell open. "Wait. What?" The chief didn't move, didn't lower his hand, just stood there at attention, waiting. "Eli, no." General Sterling finally nodded once. A small, economical movement. "At ease, Chief Morris," he said quietly. The chief lowered his hand. Tyrell stepped forward, his confident mask cracking. Hold on. There's been some kind of mistake." He gestured at Eli. "That's a homeless man. A bum. I've been trying to get him off my property for 3 days." Captain Morris turned his head slowly, like noticing a fly for the first time. "Your property?" he said. "Yes, my property. I manage this building, and that man—" Morris raised one hand and pushed Tyrell back. Not hard, not violent, just a simple, dismissive motion, the way you'd brush away an insect. Tyrell stumbled backward, his polished shoes scuffing on the floor. "Step back, sir," Morris said. His voice was flat, bored. "And be quiet." Tyrell's face went red. "Excuse me? Do you know who I am? I'm the property manager here. I have legal authority to—" "You have nothing," Morris said. He didn't raise his voice. Didn't need to. "Now step back before I charge you with obstruction." Tyrell, opened his mouth, closed it, looked around at the other officers, at the men in suits, at the sudden crowd that had appeared out of nowhere. No one was looking at him. They were all looking at Eli. Hattie stood by the counter, her legs shaking, her mind spinning. She didn't understand. None of this made sense. Eli was homeless. Eli was hungry. Eli had shared half a sandwich with her on a park bench yesterday because he had nothing. But the police chief just called him General and saluted. Her eyes found Eli's across the room. He was watching her. His face was calm, unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, something that looked like an apology. "Mrs. Williams," Morris said, turning to her. His voice softened. "Are you all right, ma'am?" Hattie couldn't speak. She just nodded, barely. Morris glanced down at the doorway. At the flag case wedged under the door, the corner of the American flag visible beneath it. His jaw tightened. He bent down, carefully lifted the case, and stood up. He held it with both hands, reverently, the way you'd hold something sacred. "Who did this?" Morris asked, quietly. No one answered. Morris's eyes shifted to Tyrell. Tyrell's face had gone pale. "I didn't. It was just, I needed something to prop the door." "You used a veteran's memorial flag," Morris said, his voice dangerously soft, as a doorstop. Tyrell's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Morris turned to one of the officers behind him. "Sergeant, document this." "Yes, sir." Morris walked over to Hattie and placed the flag case gently in her hands. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said. Hattie clutched the case to her chest, tears streaming down her face. She couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. Morris turned back to the room. "Everyone out," he said. "Eviction crew, you're dismissed. This property is under new management as of—" He checked his watch. 20 minutes ago. Tyrell's face twisted. "What? That's impossible. You can't just—" "General Sterling," Morris said, ignoring him completely. "The building is secure. All residents have been notified. Your legal team is waiting downstairs." Eli nodded once. "Thank you, Chief." Tyrell stared at him. At Eli. At the homeless man who apparently wasn't homeless at all. "Who the hell are you?" Tyrell whispered. Eli looked at him for a long moment. Then he smiled. Cold. Sharp. "Someone you should have left alone," he said. Hattie stood there clutching the flag case to her chest, her mind trying to catch up with what her eyes were seeing. Eli General Sterling stood in the center of her apartment, like he'd always belonged there. The torn jacket, the worn boots, the beard, none of it had changed. But everything had changed. Two men in expensive suits entered the apartment, moving past the stunned eviction crew still pressed against the hallway walls. One of them carried a leather portfolio. The other had a phone pressed to his ear, speaking in low, clipped tones. The one with the portfolio walked straight to Eli and opened it. "General," he said quietly, "documents are ready for your signature." Eli glanced at the papers, then nodded. "Later. Take care of the residents first." "Already handled, sir. Every tenant has been notified. Rent freeze effective immediately. No evictions. We're issuing refunds for any illegitimate fees collected in the past 6 months." Tyrell's head snapped toward them. "Wait. What? You can't just—" The lawyer turned to him with the kind of look you'd give a stain on your shirt. "And you are?" he asked coolly. "I'm the property manager," Tyrell said, his voice rising. "I have a contract. Legal authority over this building. You can't just walk in here and—" "Your contract," the lawyer interrupted, "was with the previous ownership entity. That entity sold the building 3 days ago. Your contract is void." Tyrell's face went white. 3 days ago? "Correct." The lawyer pulled a document from the portfolio and held it out. "Sterling Shield Foundation purchased the outstanding debt on this property 72 hours ago. Full acquisition. All cash. No contingencies." The legal transfer was finalized this morning. The paper hung in the air between them. Tyrell didn't take it. He just stared at it like it might bite him. "That's impossible," he whispered. "You can't buy a building in 3 days." The lawyer's expression didn't change. Sterling Shield Foundation maintains a $50 million rapid acquisition fund for exactly this purpose. All cash purchase. No inspection contingency. We closed in 48 hours. He dropped the paper on the counter. Perfectly legal. Tyrell's hand trembled as he picked up the document. His eyes scanned the text, his face going from white to red to white again. His gaze snapped to Eli. The homeless man. The bum he'd threatened. The man who'd been sleeping on park benches. "This can't be real," Tyrell said, his voice cracking. "You're nobody. You're nothing." Eli didn't move, didn't react, just watched him with those cold, steady eyes. The lawyer spoke instead. "Mr. Stevens is the new owner of this property, which means you, Mr. Tyrell, are currently trespassing." Tyrell's hands shook. The $5,000 waiver he'd forced Hattie to sign slipped from his fingers and fluttered to the floor. A draft from the open door caught it, sent it skittering across the floor and out into the hallway. Gone. "You're evicted," the lawyer continued, "effective immediately. You have 1 hour to remove your personal belongings from the building office. After that, you'll be escorted off the property." Tyrell opened his mouth, closed it, looked around at the officers, the suits, the sudden army of people who'd appeared from nowhere. No one was on his side. Captain Morris stepped forward. "Come on, sir. Time to go." "This isn't over," Tyrell said weakly. "I'll sue. You'll lose," the lawyer said, "but you're welcome to try." Morris took Tyrell by the arm and guided him toward the door. Tyrell stumbled, his polished shoes catching on the carpet. The eviction crew followed, tools clattering, faces confused. And just like that, they were gone. The apartment fell silent. Hattie stood by the counter, still holding the flag case, her mind spinning. She looked at Eli. At the man she'd shared her last piece of bread with. The man she thought was broken, homeless, lost. "I don't understand," she whispered. "How did you—" Eli's face softened. He walked over to her slowly, hands loose at his sides. "It's a long story, Hattie," he said gently. "But you were hungry," Hattie said, her voice shaking. "You had nothing. I had everything I needed," Eli said quietly. "I just needed to know who you were. When it mattered." Hattie's knees went weak. She sank into the nearest chair, still clutching the flag. "Who are you really?" she whispered. Eli opened his mouth to answer. Then his phone buzzed. He pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and his expression shifted. Business. Efficient. "Excuse me 1 moment," he said. He stepped out onto the porch and pressed the phone to his ear. Hattie heard fragments through the open door. "Yes," confirmed. She passed the evaluation. "Foundation. Prepare the documents." He turned slightly, and she saw his profile against the gray Detroit sky. He wasn't standing like a homeless man anymore. He was standing like a commander. "Have the board ready," Eli said into the phone. "I'm bringing her in tomorrow." He ended the call and stood there for a moment, looking out at the city. Hattie's hands tightened around the flag case. Tomorrow. Bringing her where? For what? Captain Morris didn't leave with Tyrell. He stood in the hallway just outside Hattie's door, speaking quietly into his radio. Hattie could hear fragments, codes, addresses, instructions she didn't understand. Then he stepped back into the apartment. His face was grim. "General Sterling," Morris said, "we have a problem." Eli turned from the porch. "What kind of problem?" Legal reviewed the situation. Morris pulled a notepad from his pocket. "The extortion attempt, the threats, the flag." He paused. "Sir, we have grounds for charges." Eli nodded once. "Bring him back." Morris gestured to someone in the hallway. Moments later, Tyrell reappeared in the doorway, flanked by 2 officers. His face was pale, his earlier confidence completely gone. "Charges?" Tyrell's voice cracked. "For what? I didn't do anything illegal." "You attempted to extort $5,000 from Mrs. Williams," Morris said flatly, holding up the waiver document. "Using falsified claims of property damage. That's felony blackmail." I was just..." Tyrell stammered. "You threatened her with criminal charges if she didn't sign," Morris continued. "You intimidated an elderly woman in her own home. That's elder abuse under Michigan law. Tyrell's mouth opened and closed. And you used a veteran's memorial flag as a doorstop, Morris said, his voice dropping to something cold. You desecrated a symbol presented to a widow in honor of her husband's service. It was just a... Tyrell started. Just a what? Eli's voice cut through the room like a blade. He walked over slowly until he was standing directly in front of Tyrell. Just a piece of cloth? Eli said quietly. Just a box? Just an old lady who couldn't fight back? Tyrell pressed himself against the doorframe. I didn't mean... You meant all of it, Eli said. His voice was calm, too calm. You've been doing this for years, using the law as a weapon, targeting people who can't afford lawyers. He stepped closer. People like Hattie. Tyrell's face went red. She was behind on rent. I had every right. You had nothing, Eli said. And now you have less than that. He turned to Morris. Charge him. Morris nodded. Yes, sir. He gestured to the officers. Mr. Tyrell, you're under arrest for attempted extortion and elder abuse. You have the right to remain silent. Wait! Tyrell's voice rose. You can't do this! It was just a stupid box, a piece of wood. It doesn't mean anything. The room went silent. Eli walked over to where Hattie sat, still clutching the flag case against her chest. Her hands were trembling so badly she could barely hold it. Hattie, he said softly. May I? She looked up at him, tears streaming down her face, and nodded. Eli took the case from her hands gently. He pulled a silk handkerchief from his jacket pocket, the only clean thing on him, and carefully wiped the glass front, wiped away the dust from the hallway floor, the scuff mark from Tyrell's shoe. Then he knelt down in front of her, not like a homeless man, like a soldier presenting something sacred. This, Eli said softly, holding out the case, is not a box. Hattie's hands rose slowly to take it back. It's a promise, Eli continued. A promise that your husband's sacrifice meant something, that his service mattered, that he won't be forgotten. Hattie clutched the flag case to her chest again, a sob breaking loose from her throat. It's honor, Eli said, looking up at her. Something he earned, something you've protected, something that can never be taken from you. He stood and turned back to Tyrell, who was now in handcuffs. No, Eli said, his voice cold. It's honor. Something you don't have. Tyrell opened his mouth, closed it. For the first time, he had nothing to say. Morris nodded to the officers. Let's go. They guided Tyrell toward the door. This time, he didn't protest, didn't threaten, didn't shout about lawsuits. He just walked, head down, hands cuffed behind his back. Hattie watched through blurred eyes as they led him down the stairs. She heard the front door open, close, and then he was gone. The apartment fell quiet. Eli pulled up the other folding chair and sat down beside her. For a long time, neither of them said anything. Finally, Hattie found her voice. Why? She whispered. Why did you do all this? Eli looked at his hands, rough, calloused. Because my son believed people like you still existed, he said quietly. People who'd give their last meal to a stranger. Who'd stand up to a bully even when they had nothing left to lose. He looked at her. I needed to know if he was right. Hattie's tears came harder. I'm nobody. I'm just... You're everything, Eli said. Everything he believed in. He stood slowly and walked to the door. I know you've been through a lot today, he said. And I know you're tired. But tomorrow, if you're willing, I'd like you to come with me. Hattie looked up. Come where? My office, Eli said. There's something I need to show you. Something I need to ask you. What is it? Eli smiled faintly. A job offer. Hattie blinked. A job? Tomorrow, Eli said. 10 a.m. I'll have a car pick you up. He paused at the door. Get some rest, Hattie. You've earned it. Then he was gone. Hattie sat alone in her apartment, holding the flag case, listening to the building settle around her. For the first time in years, the apartment didn't feel cold. It felt like home. The car arrived at exactly 10 a.m. Not a taxi, not an Uber. A black town car with tinted windows and a driver in a pressed suit who opened the door for her and called her Mrs. Williams, like she was somebody important. Hattie sat in the back seat, hands folded in her lap, watching Detroit slide past the window. They drove through neighborhoods she recognized, then ones she didn't. The buildings got taller, cleaner, the kind of part of town where people like her didn't usually go. The car pulled up in front of a glass tower, sleek, modern, catching the morning sun like a blade. Gold letters above the entrance read, "Sterling Shield Foundation." The driver opened her door. "They're expecting you, ma'am," he said. Hattie stepped out onto the sidewalk, feeling impossibly small. She was wearing her best dress, the navy one she'd worn to her husband's funeral 6 years ago. It was clean, pressed, but it was still old. She felt like she didn't belong here. The lobby took her breath away. White marble floors, floor-to-ceiling windows, a waterfall feature running down one wall. People in expensive suits moving with purpose, carrying tablets and leather folders. A woman in a burgundy blazer approached her with a warm smile. "Mrs. Williams," she said, "welcome. General Sterling is expecting you. Please, follow me." They took an elevator to the top floor. The doors opened onto a hallway lined with photographs, soldiers in uniform, families receiving keys to homes, children in classrooms, veterans shaking hands with men in suits, all of them smiling, all of them helped by this place. The woman led her to a set of double doors at the end of the hall and knocked once. "Come in," a voice said from inside. The doors opened, and Hattie stopped breathing. The office was massive, windows on 3 sides overlooking the city, dark wood furniture, bookshelves lined with legal texts and military histories, an American flag in one corner, and standing by the window, dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her yearly rent, was Eli. No, not Eli. Elijah Sterling. He turned when she entered, and for a moment, she didn't recognize him. The beard was gone. His hair was trimmed, silver at the temples. His face was clean, sharp, the face of a man who commanded boardrooms and military operations. But his eyes were the same, tired, kind, haunted. "Hattie," he said, walking over. "Thank you for coming." She couldn't speak, just stared at him. "I know this is a lot," Elijah said gently. "Please, sit down." He gestured to a leather chair in front of his desk. Hattie sank into it, her legs shaking. Her eyes drifted to the wall behind his desk, and she froze. There was a portrait hanging there. A young man in army fatigues, smiling at the camera. Clean cut, strong, his hand resting on something small and gold in his palm. A coin. The same coin Eli had shown her on the porch. "That's," Hattie whispered. "That's the coin." Elijah turned to look at the portrait. His face softened. "Yes," he said quietly. "That's Marcus, my son." Hattie's hand went to her mouth. "He's holding it in the photo," she said. "The challenge coin." "He never went anywhere without it," Elijah said. His voice was thick. "That picture was taken 3 months before Kandahar. 3 months before." He didn't finish. Hattie's eyes filled with tears. "He looks like a good man." "He was," Elijah said, "the best I've ever known." He walked over to stand beside the portrait, looking up at his son's face. "After he died, I built this foundation in his name," Elijah said. "Spent 3 years funding projects, writing checks, trying to honor his memory. But I realized something." He turned to her. "I didn't know if what he believed was still true, if the goodness he died protecting still existed." Hattie wiped her eyes. "So I went looking," Elijah continued. "Not in boardrooms, not in galas. I went to the streets, to the places where people are desperate, where kindness costs something." He paused. "And I found you." He walked back to his desk and picked up a folder. Inside was a deed official, stamped, legal. He held it out to her. "This is the deed to your building," Elijah said. "It's yours, free and clear. No one can ever take it from you." Hattie stared at the paper, unable to move. "But I'm not just giving you a building," Elijah said. "I'm asking you to help me run this foundation. I need someone who understands struggle, someone who chooses kindness, even when it costs everything." He leaned forward. "You'll be the heart of this place, Hattie. Nothing gets approved without your conscience signing off on it. No decision gets made unless you believe it's right. Hattie's breath caught. I don't have experience, she whispered. I'm not educated. I'm just... You're what Marcus was, Elijah said. His voice cracked. You're proof that he was right. He looked up at the portrait again. I found her, son, he whispered. I found one. He turned back to Hattie, his eyes wet. Marcus died believing people were worth saving, Elijah said. You proved he was right. Hattie's tears spilled over. She looked at the deed in her hands, at the portrait on the wall, at the man in the expensive suit who'd pretended to be homeless just to find someone good. Why me? She whispered. Because, when no one was watching, Elijah said, you did what was right. That's rarer than you think. He extended his hand. Help me honor him, he said. Please. Hattie looked at his hand. Then she took it. Yes, she whispered. I'll help you. Elijah's face broke into the first real smile she'd ever seen from him. Thank you, he said. 1 month later, the sound of a drill whirring cut through the crisp morning air. Hattie stood on the sidewalk, hands deep in her coat pockets, watching 2 workmen on ladders. They were unscrewing the old, rusted sign above the apartment entrance, the one that had loomed over her for years like a threat. With a final clank, the metal plate came free. Easy now, one workman called out. They lowered it down and hoisted the new sign into place. It was made of polished wood, simple and sturdy. The gold lettering caught the winter sun. Veterans Haven. In memory of Marcus Sterling, Hattie smiled. It wasn't a landlord sign. It was a welcome mat. It looks good, a voice said beside her. Hattie turned. Elijah was standing there. He wasn't wearing the expensive suit from the office, but he wasn't in rags either. He wore a simple wool coat and jeans, looking less like a billionaire and more like the man she'd shared a sandwich with. It looks right, Hattie corrected him. Elijah looked at the building. The windows were clean. The graffiti was gone. The front door, the one Tyrell had propped open with the flag case, was freshly painted a deep, welcoming red. You know, Elijah said, my accountants are still trying to figure out your business model. They say giving away 20 units rent-free to homeless veterans isn't exactly profitable. Hattie chuckled softly. Tell them the profit isn't in the bank, Mr. Eli. It's in the sleep. The sleep. Knowing that 20 men and women aren't freezing on the street tonight, Hattie said. That pays better dividends than any stock market. Elijah smiled, shaking his head. You kept the ground floor unit for yourself? My knees aren't getting any younger, Hattie said. Plus, I need to be close to the door. Someone has to greet them when they come in. Make sure they know they're home. You're a stubborn woman, Hattie Williams. And you're a pushy man, Elijah Sterling. They shared a laugh, the kind that comes easy between old friends. Come on, Hattie said. Let's sit. My legs are tired. They walked to the park across the street, to the same bench where they had met. The oak tree was still bare, but the air felt different. The biting chill of Detroit winter was softening into the promise of spring. They sat down. Across the street, a moving truck was parked in front of the building. But it wasn't an eviction crew taking things out. It was a group of young men and women, some with limps, some with scars, some just looking tired carrying boxes in. They weren't moving fast. They were laughing, calling out to each other. One young man, missing his left arm, was struggling with a lamp. Another rushed over to help him, and they bumped shoulders in a familiar, brotherly way. Elijah watched them, his eyes glistening. He would have loved this, he whispered. He's watching, Hattie said, patting Elijah's hand. And he's smiling. Just then, a figure approached the building. A young man, maybe 20 years old. He wore a dirty hoodie and carried a battered duffel bag. He stopped at the gate, looking up at the new sign. He hesitated, shifting his weight, looking ready to run. He looked invisible. Hattie watched him. She saw the hunger in his posture, the fear in his eyes, the way he checked to see if anyone was going to chase him away. She didn't stay on the bench. With a groan of effort, she stood up. Hattie? Elijah asked. Duty calls, she said. She walked across the street, not fast, but purposeful. The young man saw her coming and tensed up, gripping his bag tighter. Hattie didn't stop until she was right in front of him. "You look like you've walked a long way, son," she said. The young man blinked, surprised. I'm just looking for a place to rest. I didn't mean to trespass." Hattie smiled. The same smile she'd given a homeless general a month ago. "You're not trespassing," she said. "You're just on time for lunch." She extended her hand. "I'm Hattie, and this is your home, if you want it." The young man stared at her hand, then at the open door, then back at her. Slowly, his shoulders dropped. The tension left his body. He took her hand. "Thank you," he whispered. Hattie led him inside. From the park bench, Elijah watched them go. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the gold coin. He flipped it once, caught it, and held it tight. Then he looked directly at the camera at us. The billionaire faded away. The general faded away. There was just a father, sharing a final truth. "God often visits us in rags," he said softly, "to test our hearts." He looked back at the building, where the lights were turning on, one by one, in the twilight. "Make sure you pass the test." Hattie chose service over wealth. If you were her, would you have done the same? Share this story to spread the love.